What's going on, everyone? Welcome to the Thursday, January 23rd edition of the Ship My Money Show. I'm your host, Adam Scherer. You can follow me on Twitter at ShipMyMoney DFS. 8-game NBA slate tonight. A lot of moving parts, a lot of injury news that we're waiting on. Somebody mentioned in chat off the top that it's going to be a late swap slate. It certainly looks likely. You have Golden State at 10 o'clock with half their team questionable and or out. There is some other news in general that we are waiting on. And a lot of teams with just kind of weird injuries or guys already ruled out that create situations that I think are really fun for DFS, but also can make it really easy to make mistakes or just be wrong, because we have some situations where we have teams missing players that or combinations of players that we haven't seen this year. So you're kind of just guessing at what they're going to do. And if you guess right, obviously you can make a lot of money. If you're guessing in a way that the field in general isn't, you also run the risk of, it wouldn't be the first time if I guessed a coach is going to do something and I end up playing somebody that DNPs or something like that. But glad I'm doing this show for that reason alone, just because I'll hopefully catch, if I happened to project somebody that I'm not really sure about too high and they're showing up for me, I'll be able to catch that and change it. But should be interesting to walk through. There are some plays that look very, very obvious, but then I think there's just a lot of spots that are going to be relatively low owned, especially with it being an 8-game slate that we can target. So going to go through game by game as always, take a look at how my exposures would look right now. Again, take those with a grain of salt. They're going to change between now and lock. Also, one thing off the top, I haven't done my own projections yet updated and dialed in my projections for Portland, Orlando, or Golden State. Just trying to wait on Q tags there. So definitely take my player exposures there with a grain of salt. My projections will just end up being different by the time we get to lock. If you are interested in my projections, they are available using the link in the description below. If you are an Endgame Syndicate member, they are posted in Discord. If you just want the projections, you can use that Dub Club link. 3-day free trial, then $30 a month gets you access to my DraftKings and FanDuel projections. So obviously no optimizer attached, no sims attached or anything like that. But if you are just looking for quality projections at a reasonable price, you can get those there. The sheet updates as I update my stuff. So as soon as I have a new projection, you have a new projection. So yeah, check that out if you do want those. But just keep that in mind on Portland, Orlando, and Golden State. I just am running with baseline projections right now, so pretty good chance that something is screwed up or off at least a little bit. But starting here with the Portland and Orlando game, really, really tough spot for Portland, unappealing spot overall going into Orlando. There is the potential for value to open up here. As you can see with all the Q tags projected in, I'm not getting to anybody really from Portland. The field's not getting to anybody from Portland. And I would expect that to be the case. You have a good Orlando team defensively. You have a slate where this is the only 7 o'clock game and you have late news. So in addition to it being a difficult matchup anyway against Orlando, there is a little bit of an extra additional penalty to rostering Portland guys, just because it takes up a roster spot that you may want to have open for flexibility later. So there are a lot of things working against Portland, especially if the Q tag guys play. DeAndre Ayton is questionable. Kamara is questionable. Chris Murray's questionable. Simons is questionable. The Murray piece, doesn't matter unless everybody else is out. Then it matters. But the DeAndre Ayton piece is really big. We saw once again last game with no Donovan Clingan that even with Robert Williams active, DeAndre Ayton played a ton of minutes. He played 34 minutes in that one. So this is a spot where I do think, and I'm checking now. So I had a baseline projection of 31 and a half minutes on Ayton here. I might end up a little bit higher than that if he ends up being in, but it's probably going to be in that ballpark. And one way or the other in this matchup, he's not going to show up a ton. So if you get a situation though where Ayton is out, then you're probably getting Robert Williams as the starter. Maybe you get Jabari Walker or something. But it would make, Robert Williams certainly look better as a value piece. He, I believe, still has power forward eligibility as well. 3,200 power forward eligible. He's going to start to look good if DeAndre Ayton is out. If Simons is out, you're probably getting Scoot Henderson back in the starting lineup. Or if Kamara is out, you're probably getting Henderson back in the starting lineup. So his playing time would look better, but obviously it's going to look the best if Kamara and Simons are out. So a lot of moving pieces here, but this is a team that is relatively correctly priced because you have had guys out recently. Jeremy Grant was out for a while. Ayton was out for a while, or at least a couple of games. So, Henderson's up to 6,600. Avdia's at 6,900. There is some, potential for value to open up here, though. And then one other spot that I would point out, I do actually think is important, and it looks like it's already accounted for in my baseline stuff, but Jeremy Grant did play 34 minutes last game. I mentioned it on my last show that his salary's fallen all the way to $5,100. And it's really just because he's been semi-limited since coming back from injury. So he got up to 34 minutes last game. Jeremy Grant, unrestricted, is underpriced at $5,100. Still clearly not a priority on this slate, but I would say that especially if everybody is in for Portland, Jeremy Grant is the most mispriced guy on this team at 5,100. Still not really getting to him, though. Dre every day said, I just subbed to you on Dub Club. Are these just DraftKings projections you post? FanDuel's in there also. DraftKings and FanDuel are both in there. On the other side for Orlando, huge Q tags here as well. Jonathan Isaac is available. Gary Harris is out. But we have a Q tag still on Cole Anthony. We have a Q tag on Franz Wagner. So Franz Wagner obviously is the piece that honestly I have no idea what to do with. Like if he comes back, I don't know if he's starting. I don't know how many minutes he's playing. We'll probably get some sort of word on that. My best guess, just from the standpoint of what I generally do in a situation like this, is like mid-20s minutes for Franz, and not something I'm going to want to get to. It does pull down Paolo Banchero's rates if Wagner is back, but we have also seen Banchero play more minutes lately. So I think from a salary standpoint, it kind of comes out in the wash, especially in a solid matchup here. Banchero got up to 31.8 minutes last game. He probably would have played an extra minute or two if it had really been competitive to the end. So you are getting close to, unlimited, unrestricted Paolo Banchero. Probably not quite to that point yet, but at $8,400, even if Franz Wagner is back, I think Banchero is certainly playable here. If Wagner is out, he looks better just because the offense is going to run through him even more. And then if Cole Anthony and Franz Wagner are out, you're kind of in a situation at that point where there's just nobody to play offense on this team outside of Banchero, which in a lot of cases, it does lead to reduced efficiency, and it doesn't necessarily mean that guys have huge fantasy games, but Banchero is a good enough player that the more usage and everything you can throw at him, the more I'm going to be interested. So there is the potential, depending on how news breaks here, for Banchero to look really good. Anthony Black, 5,400. If Anthony is out, should most likely start again, play a bunch of minutes. KCP at 4,500 would get a little bit of a playing time bump if Anthony is out too. But overall, this is a team that I don't really think there are priorities from, at least right now, with the exception of Paolo Banchero, who does look good and has the potential to look even better. Again, if Anthony is out, you're going to probably want to be getting to some Anthony Black also, but there is value later on as well. Miami taking on Milwaukee. This is actually an 8:30 game now, not a 7:30 game. Milwaukee had travel issues, I assume snow-related, with their game being canceled yesterday. Jimmy Butler is out again in the latest drama in Miami. He is suspended for 2 games. So a little bit of guesswork here at the starting lineup. There are several ways they could go. We do have Tyler Hero back. So my guess at the starting lineup is that you're getting Tyler Hero, Duncan Robinson, Ware, and Bam. And then I kind of have no idea if they're going to go Terry Rozier, if they're going to go back to Haywood Highsmith, who's barely been in the rotation, but is typically the Jimmy Butler replacement in the starting lineup. So I don't know what they'll do with that 5th spot. I mean, they could go to Jaime Jaquez. They could go to, I guess they're probably not going to go to Jovic alongside Ware and Bam, but they could go Jaquez. They could go Highsmith. They could go Rozier. They could do something that I'm not expecting entirely. But either way, I think that Ware looks pretty good, but he's nowhere near as good a play as he was the other day for 2 reasons. For one, his salary jumped from $4,200 to $5,700. So massive price bump off of one start where he had a massive game. But the other big thing is that he did lose power forward eligibility. So you take on a lot more risk going to him now because he is center only. The opportunity cost is higher and all of that. He's getting 22% ownership at the moment. I still think he's fine. Like, he projects to play, I'm at 30 and a half minutes here. Certainly could play more. One thing to keep in mind from that last game too, not that he wasn't going to play a bunch of minutes anyway, but the closing lineups in that game were very misleading. Miami was getting their asses kicked. They were down by like 25 plus points. I think it was around 20 to 25 at the end of the third quarter. So the fourth quarter, even though this ended up being a 9-point game, the fourth quarter was played by their bench unit all the way through. They brought them back. Spoelstra left them in. So every fourth quarter minute was Duncan Robinson, Ware, Jovic, Jaquez, and Larson, who hadn't even played in the first half. So while Ware did play 38 and a half minutes, I'm certainly not expecting that to be something that he averages. He played about 17 and a half minutes in the first half. I do still think that he has the potential, even in a normal game, to play, low to mid 30s, but it's not just this guy plays 38 and a half minutes thing now. That was, just a weird game flow in that one. So keep that in mind. But I think he looks fine. I'm just a little scared off by the ownership, given that the salary jumped and he is center only right now. So it's kind of like the salary jumped in two different ways because of the opportunity cost increasing and the actual cost increasing, and the ownership is still there. You can just find a million good center pivots if you want to, but still clearly has upside. Not getting to much Robinson or much Bam, neither is the Field. Field is projected to have 19% Jaquez right now. This is probably just a function of how starting lineups are being projected. I did not project him to start for right now. My guess at the starting lineup was that Rozier stays in it. I don't really have a lot of confidence in that. We know that they had moved Rozier to the bench recently, and then he moved back into the starting lineup for Hero. But my guess was that they go Hero, Rozier, Robinson, Ware, and Bam, in which case I projected Jaquez for like 24 minutes. But the industry in general, I think, is assuming he starts. I'm seeing like 28 to 30 minute projections from industry sites. So if he does start, swap to Jaquez, or if you think he's going to start, just, play him at 5K. That is a good value if he starts. I just don't know if he starts or not. With Rozier projected as a starter, I'm still not getting to him much at 5,300 or getting him at all at 5,300. But like I said, I don't know what the starting line is going to be. They easily could go back to Haywood Highsmith as well, which would actually make him somewhat interesting at 3,200, because when he has started without Jimmy Butler, he's actually played real minutes. But again, he's kind of been kicked out of the rotation at this point. So if he doesn't start, I'm not even really thinking about him, but if he does start, it becomes mildly interesting. So definitely going to need to keep an eye on the Miami lineup, and now we probably won't get it till like 8 p.m. So that is one spot where you'll probably want to be expecting the swap. On the Milwaukee side, no super important injury news here. AJ Green is out again. He was out there last game as well. Doesn't have a huge impact. You get solidified Ryan Rollins minutes. You get Gary Trent playing, mid-20s. Same for Taurean Prince. Jackson plays, 19 to 20 minutes in his kind of fake start, but nothing too important there, and nothing from Milwaukee that looks great. I think you can get to some Chris Middleton. He's still reasonably priced at 5,600, but of course you do have the limits on his raw upside, just because they're most likely not going to let him go play 28, 29 minutes, anything like that. Bobby Portis, you do have a lot of volatility there, which is nice. Salary has come down to 5,100. He really hasn't been playing a lot lately, which of course is the issue. But if he does go out there and play well, or Brook Lopez gets in foul trouble, or Giannis gets in foul trouble, or whatever, we know he's a good point per minute guy. You just have to kind of run good on the minutes. So the volatility there is nice. I'm getting him a little bit. Not getting too much Giannis at 11.7. You can kind of ignore the Ryan Rollins here. That will probably just disappear. But, if you want to play some Giannis, obviously it's fine, but he is pretty expensive. I think that there are just a lot of other plays that I'm going to end up prioritizing today over Giannis. Dame getting 6% ownership. Same kind of thing at 8,500. There's a million good $8,500-ish guys. There's a million good guards. If Dame's the one that you want to click on here and there, perfectly fine. Brolo at 5,200. I'm not getting. I would say he's one of the million guys that you could use as a pivot to Ware in that price range. Like, his playing time's been back up. We saw that weird stretch a couple of weeks ago where when Chris Middleton was in, Brook Lopez just like wasn't getting fourth quarter or closing minutes, but that seems to have just been a random thing. They're not doing that anymore. So you've seen more playing time from him. As you can see, like I don't think he's a better play than Ware. I have more Ware, but just one of many guys that, if you were getting 10-1 on Ware versus Lopez, you would take Lopez. So one of many possible pivots if you want to go that route, but nothing exciting there. Franz Wagner, as chat mentioned, is in. Not sure if that starting lineup has come out. Don't see a starting lineup yet. So if he's coming off the bench, I think that's a really clear sign that he's limited. If he starts, then it kind of just falls into the I don't really know what to do range. As far as just there being a lot of volatility, but he has been practicing. I think a good proxy is probably just to look at how they've handled Banchero in his return. Came back on the 10th, played 27 minutes, didn't reach 30 minutes until yesterday. So I would expect that you're just getting, 26, 27 minutes from Franz, unless we hear otherwise in one direction or the other. Toronto taking on Atlanta in one of the games with a relatively close spread. Grady Dick, $4,200. That price tag is just getting really cheap. Not that he's a great player or fantasy producer, but it does start. You do have Agbaji questionable here, but still no Emmanuel Quickly. So there are plenty of minutes available for Grady Dick. I have him projected for about 28, and it just makes him show up in around 30% of my lineups. Field is in the same ballpark as far as ownership goes too. Not a great point per minute guy, but not horrible, and pretty good matchup here. Relatively high total at 115.5 for Toronto. So just projects as a good value play. Have him projected around 6x. Scotty Barnes looks good. Field getting to 22% of him, 21% of RJ Barrett. I'm closer to the field on Barnes than Barrett. I do just kind of have some playing time concerns on Barrett. His playing time has been fluky to some extent. Dealt with foul trouble last game, but there have been a couple of games where he does get up to 34, 35 minutes, but in general, he does play a couple minutes less than Barnes. The price tag is pretty expensive. So when you're getting similar ownership and not that big of a salary difference, and also just a lot of other players you can play in this range, I am getting to less Barrett than Barnes, which I am fine with. Jakob Poeltl, I'm getting to again. He killed me the other day. But I just don't totally buy into this drop off in playing time from Poeltl lately, because for the most part, you can explain it. The last game he closed, he played like 30 minutes. That's the only one that you kind of can't explain. Like he just played 30 minutes in a competitive game, which would be a bad thing for him going forward. But other than that, he's been in foul trouble. You've had blowouts. Like you don't have to go back that far to find games where he plays 33, 34 minutes. It's happened within the last 5. So I'm still projecting him to play 31 minutes here at 6,200. He's getting 17% ownership. It's not like he's super sneaky or anything like that. But I do think the salary falling here is mostly falling for no reason other than he's just been on the wrong side of variance in recent games. So I do still like getting to Jakob Poeltl. He is the guy from Toronto I'm getting to the second most. Chris Boucher is one of these pieces that probably goes away for me, at least to some extent. But at the same time, he is 3,400. You don't have Mogbo to worry about. You don't have Battle to worry about. Those guys are in the G League. Not that they've been playing ahead of Boucher anyway, but it's when you think about what could go wrong. But for Boucher, I'm interested because we'd seen the playing time in general increase lately. If you go and look at his recent games, he only played 11 minutes last game, but that's a game where he was dealing with an illness. It was actually reported that he wasn't going to play. He played 11 minutes in the first half. He didn't play in the second half. I don't know for sure if that was illness related, but it seems really logical to think that it had something to do with it. But then other than that, you've got 15 minutes, 17 minutes, 22 minutes, 20 minutes in the 4 games prior. I have him in for 16 minutes here. If Agbaji's out, I think that becomes even more solidified. But that's, even with Agbaji projected in, I think Boucher in large field tournaments, he certainly has a ceiling. So I probably don't want to actually have 21%. That's a really aggressive stand, I think. But if he's just really not going to get any ownership, I do think that the ceiling he offers is pretty interesting when he's only $3,400. So I do like getting to him at 1%. I probably just don't need him in a fifth of my lineups. Talked about Barnes, talked about Barrett. Kelly Olynyk, 3,700, probably just playing pretty much every center minute that Jakob Poeltl doesn't play, or at least close to it. We haven't seen a true 48-minute split. When Jakob Poeltl gets in foul trouble, Kelly Olynyk doesn't end up playing 30 minutes, but he does obviously play more. Last game, Pirtle played 19 minutes. I think Olynyk got up to 22. So you do get some added upside, some added volatility from Olynyk if Pirtle gets in foul trouble. He's a good point per minute guy. He's only 3,700. The big difference, I think, between him and Boucher, though, is the position. So Olynyk being center only, Boucher being power forward, there's just going to be less opportunity cost on Boucher. But other than that, they are very similar type plays where they're good point per minute guys, and then you're just hoping to one way or another find more minutes than people are expecting them to play. Jamal Shed, basically the same thing at 3,200. He's most likely going to be on the floor for basically give or take every minute that Davion Mitchell is not. That sort of like minutes string, basically, where one guy loses a minute, somebody else gains a minute, just always makes cheap plays somewhat interesting in large field tournaments because really only one player needs to have something go wrong for them to get more minutes than you're projecting. One other thing to mention here for Toronto, and he's not showing up for me right now, which is kind of disappointing, but Bruce Brown's getting 5% ownership. He's 3,900. He played 25 minutes last game. And keep in mind, that's a game where Agbaji was out and Boucher didn't play in the second half. So there were more minutes available. I'm not projecting 25 minutes. I think I projected like 21. But on the other hand, like Bruce Brown is somebody that as he gets, sort of ramped up and fully healthy, coming back from missing the beginning of the season, he's clearly one of the better players on the Raptors and would make sense to kind of be a sixth man type that like plays mid 20s frequently. So I kind of want to see it happen in a game where there are other options that could prevent him, but it wouldn't be shocking if Bruce Brown just plays more than me and pretty much the entire industry are projecting right now. I certainly was kind of cautious on his minutes, but I do want to pay close attention to that because if Toronto were a good team that wanted to win games, I would be pretty aggressive in ramping up Bruce Brown's minutes, but because they're not, I think there's a pretty decent chance that they kind of just in general hover around like 21, 22 minutes. But I do want to pay attention to what they're doing. So if you're looking at a lineup, like say you're hand building or whatever, and you need somebody at 3,900 that has upside, Bruce Brown does fit that. And I would actually like ideally to be turning some of this 21% Chris Boucher into Bruce Brown, maybe kind of like having 10% of each instead of just Boucher. So I did want to mention that on Brown. On the other side for Atlanta, most likely, at least right now, the most popular guy on the slate, Onyeka Okongwu moved into the starting lineup in place of Clint Capella yesterday. He played about 29 minutes, if I remember correctly. Or no, I think he played like 26 and a half. Capella played well. Okongwu played 26.8. Capella played 21.2 off the bench. Again, Capella played well. So when Capella's in, you're going to still have that kind of annoying split that we've had all season long, where they split 48 minutes. Okongwu typically is going to play more, but when Capella plays well, he, is going to take minutes away. But today you don't have Capella. So you have no backup center here. Capella's out. Larry Nance is out. Dominic Barlow, I assume, is going to be the backup here. I don't think he'll actually play like all of the backup minutes. I assume that they'll run some like Jalen Johnson at the 5, get some more minutes out of their wings type thing. But it does mean that you can increase the playing time projection on Okongwu quite a bit, not having to deal with any sort of backup center. So I'm at 32 minutes here. If you go back to last season, look at games, all games that Okongwu started, which most of them are going to be games that Capella was out. His like median minutes is around 33. So I have him at 32 minutes here. I think that he should pretty much be on the floor for as many minutes as he can, barring foul trouble, blowouts, all of that. So I'm happy with the projection here. 5,600 is just still really cheap. And I'm getting to 57%, Fields at 53%. I just kind of think this is a really easy one to get to. Also on FanDuel, as far as I know, I haven't double checked, but I know for pretty much all season, he's had power forward eligibility too. Assuming that's still the case, he's an even better play there. Bogdan Bogdanovic, I think, is an interesting tournament play. He's only 4K, shooting guard, small forward eligible. Fields at 3%. I'm getting to 9. There's a lot of volatility in Atlanta minutes here because there's a couple of different ways that they could go. And this is one of those situations I was referring to at the top of the show where you're just kind of guessing because we don't have any game that we can go back to where Capella was out and Nance was out, or where like Okongwu was out and Nance was out even. So there are different things that Atlanta could do. They could just split 48 minutes between Okongwu and Dominic Barlow the same way that they split 48 minutes between Okongwu and Capella. Like I said, that's not exactly what I'm projecting. I have 32 to Okongwu. I have about 10.5 to Barlow. So that leaves 5.5, 6 minutes, give or take, for Jalen Johnson at center, which one is good for Jalen Johnson's point per minute production, most likely. But it also means that it helps to solidify minutes for DeAndre Hunter, who's been playing, upper 20s, around 30 minutes lately with Shea out. But it also means that you could get more minutes for Bogdanovic, who his playing time's been down lately. But overall this season, over the last 10 games, averaging 22.5 minutes per game. Overall this season, averaging 24.5 minutes per game, only 20.5 over his last 5, but did play 23 minutes 3 games ago, played 26 5 games ago. It's not like he's being limited from a physical standpoint, I don't think, beyond just they don't want to run Bogdan into the ground overall. So I have him at 22.5 minutes here, which I do think is a couple minutes higher than other places I've looked, just because there is that potential of like the other extreme where, I guess the opposite of 48-minute split for Okongwu and Barlow is what if they just like DNP Barlow and Jalen Johnson's the backup center, and then you're getting Krejci, Matthews, Bogdanovic, Hunter just playing a bunch of minutes. Like I said, I don't think that's the most likely case either. I think it's probably somewhere in the middle, but it did let me give a couple extra minutes to Bogdanovic just because I think that there's a better chance that he picks up a couple extra minutes than that Atlanta just runs like a really deep rotation where David Roddy's out there and Barlow's getting all the backup center minutes or something like that. So I do think that you can kind of give him an extra couple of minutes, and at no ownership and about as cheap a price tag as you can get for him, I do think it's interesting. Jalen Johnson, I think, looks pretty good here. Played huge minutes yesterday. The shoulder injury, doesn't seem to be affecting him. And again, I do think there's a pretty good chance that he gets some center minutes. So I'm a little below the field, but I do think that he's a good play. DeAndre Hunter is up to 6K, which is relatively difficult to get to. But again, the minutes should be there. We've seen 30 to 32 minutes in all 3 games without Shea. Obviously, I didn't project it quite that high, but I do have him at about 29 minutes. So I think that looks good. Trae Young, 9,600, plenty of good pay up options, plenty of good guards to get to. Trae Young is one of them. He looks fine. Good matchup against Toronto. Krejci at 4,500. Nothing exciting there. Okongwu clearly the priority. And then I think, if you can get to Jalen Johnson, I would say he's the second best play from Atlanta. But, obviously there's plenty of alternatives in that price range too. I do like Bogdanovic as a contrarian play as well. Spizwolf said a little excessive on grading though. I mean, not really. Like the field's at 22, 25%, somewhere in there. I'm not that far over the field at 30%. It's just a good value. Would I rather not have 30% Grady Dick? Sure. But he's $4,200 on a team with like a 116 total. It's just going to project well. Dallas taking on OKC. We have tons of guys out for Dallas. No questionable guys, just a lot of guys out. No Luka, no Exum, no Hardy, no Lively, no Najee Marshall, no Dwight Powell, no Klay Thompson. So basically the same situation that we had yesterday in a game where they are facing an insanely good defensive team and they are massive underdogs. On the one hand, I would like to just not be getting here because they're probably going to get the shit kicked out of them by OKC. On the other hand, there are just so many minutes available and guys at favorable price tags that they still show up. Olivier Maxence Prosper got the start yesterday. He played like 25 minutes. He's $3,200. This is basically how I handled it yesterday too. I had him in like 25% of my lineups. The field was at 35, 40%. Today he's projected to be like 47% owned. I have 28%. Like I have a good amount of him. I don't really think that I need him in 50% of my lineups. Like he's not a great point per minute guy. Maybe he plays garbage time if it gets to that point. But he's a good point per dollar projection. I kind of just question the likelihood of him putting up a score that I can't find anywhere else. So like he's a good value, but I think I can find some other stuff. Also, Quentin Grimes, 33% ownership, another, kind of similar to what we saw last night. The playing time is going to be there. He played like 36 minutes yesterday. I projected him around 32.5 today. There's just a limit on, there's so many minutes open for him when you don't have Hardy, you don't have Luka, you don't have Hardy, you don't have Najee Marshall. That's a big one. There's just so many minutes available for somebody like Quentin Grimes that can defend multiple positions. Not the best point per minute guy by any stretch, but shooting guard, small forward, $4,900 price tag. If this game is actually competitive, he's probably playing 36, 37 minutes again. So projecting him for 32 and a half, I think, accounts for the fact that they're probably going to get killed. So he looks good to me. I'm not comfortable with it from a, I think the floor is still low because he's not a good point per minute guy and blowout risk and all of that, but I understand why the ownership is there. I'm pretty close to it. Daniel Gafford, 6,500, projected him for 29 minutes. Again, if this game's competitive, he's probably playing 32, 33 with no Derek Lively. They have Maxi Kleba basically as their backup center. Dwight Powell is also out, Dwight Powell is also out. So it just takes away one guy that somehow steals minutes from Gafford. Good point per minute guy, 6,500. I'm actually a little bit over the field on him. I'm over the field on PJ Washington too. And I do find this one interesting just because he's only $6,600 and you do see increased playing time for him whenever at least one of Luka or Kyrie are out. And then also they don't have anybody else to soak up offense other than Kyrie. So you can see PJ Washington get additional opportunities as well. Obviously against Oklahoma City, it's not super likely that he's efficient or that he really converts those extra opportunities at a high rate, but it does make the ceiling a little bit higher. If he were popular at 6,600, I probably would want to just find pivots that aren't playing against OKC. But if nobody's going to play $6,600 PJ Washington, I do find it interesting just from a ceiling standpoint in large field tournaments. You have to go back 24 hours to find a team that should have gotten blown out by OKC and didn't and played full minutes basically. So, it's not like it can't happen. So PJ Washington, I do think is interesting. Chat said 24-minute Franz Wagner limit. So that's good to know. Anthony Black starting. Does that mean that Cole Anthony is out or just Anthony Black is starting? Not sure. Still don't see anything on Cole Anthony. So I assume he's just not playing, but I have no idea. Robert Williams starting for DeAndre Ayton. So that does make Robert Williams look like a really good value, especially with power forward eligibility. So PJ Washington, again, I don't know if I'll actually end up with 19%, but I do think that it's an interesting tournament spot, especially he's somebody that would make a lot of sense in lineups where maybe you're playing SGA or you're playing J-Dub or something like that, where you would prefer the game to stay close. Jake said RW starting. I don't know. Oh, Robert Williams. Okay. I was thinking Russell Westbrook. I was like, yeah, that's been happening for a month and a half. On the other side for OKC, Jalen Williams is pretty much a lock to have a monster game today. He was my highest owned player yesterday. He was absolute dog shit and killed a lot of good lineups, so I assume he'll go nuts today. But really at 8,100, 7% owned. It's just a tournament play where it's a talented player. Obviously, he has a nice ceiling. He's pretty much correctly priced. I'm just a little bit over the field on him. Over the field on Wiggins. This is another spot where I projected him to start, and I don't think the industry is. He started yesterday. I obviously have no idea if he's starting today because Mark Dagnall probably still has no idea if he's starting today. If he does start, it still doesn't really mean a ton. He played way less than Cason Wallace did yesterday. I only projected him for like 24 and a half, 25 minutes. But basically, I think this ownership projection ends up coming up, and so I end up getting a little bit less. But 14% Aaron Wiggins. Isaiah Joe is still out. He's certainly playable. Lou Dort picks up an extra minute or so in projection with no Isaiah Joe. He's getting 15% ownership at 4,400. I'm pretty close to the field there. SGA at 10.5. If you can get to him, great. Obviously, once again, tons of blowout risk. But the nice thing about SGA is that, if this game does get really out of hand, he is likely to be a big reason why. One other thing that I will mention, I mentioned it yesterday too, from a rotational standpoint, and actually I want to double check that this was still the case, but normally Jalen Williams plays... Yeah, this was the case yesterday too. Jalen Williams starts the second and fourth quarter. SGA plays the entire first and third quarters. That does make SGA a little bit more blowout prone minutes-wise than Jalen Williams. Now, it's not the end of the world because, again, if SGA just never needs to come back in the fourth quarter, there's a good chance he was producing at an above average rate on a per minute basis. But Jalen Williams is a little bit less blowout prone because he will, unless, it's like a 40-point game or something, if it's, 20, 25 points after three, Jalen Williams will come out and play the first half of the fourth quarter, whereas SGA will probably be done. So that is something to keep in mind. And it is one reason why I actually do kind of like the way that I split this up, where like I'm playing Jalen Williams pretty much at the same rate the Field's playing SGA, and then I'm playing SGA at the same rate the Field's playing Williams. If this game does blow out, it actually kind of makes that Jalen Williams pivot kind of interesting to SGA. Stack and Relax said, huge downswing at the moment. Any advice? No, you and me both. Cut back, just pay attention to your process, what you're doing, make sure everything makes sense. You're not making mistakes, all that stuff. I typically check, how often I'm finishing in the top 1%, check post-contest sims from sites that I'm not using, or, ones that I do, like even SaberSim, where I'm not using their projections, but I'm using their model. It's going to be biased towards me, at least to some extent, but I still pay attention to make sure that I haven't like dropped off from where I normally am there. So it's kind of just, making sure that everything you're doing is still what you want to be doing and that you're playing as well as you can, and hopefully just running bad. But yeah, dial back volume, if you need to. Jalen Williams, the other Jalen Williams, 5,300. I'm getting a little bit. Playing time really volatile. You saw obviously the game against Cleveland, that first start where he played like 14 minutes. Then you got games where he played 26, 28, 29, somewhere in there. Then yesterday he only played 20. So at no ownership, like I don't mind getting some of him just because he could play 28 minutes. But as you can see, projected him for about 23 and a half. Certainly doesn't make him any sort of a priority. Alex Caruso got up to like 20 minutes yesterday. I would caution that, one, it's a back-to-back. Two, that was a game that ended up being competitive, so he got closing minutes. You're still not expecting, a ton of playing time or anything from Alex Caruso here. I projected him for 19 and a half. I think you could make a case for like 18. So he's showing up a little bit for me and for the field, but I would, point that out. Moving on to Sacramento, taking on Denver. Jake said, with Ayton out, do you do anything to change rates projection for Wendell Carter Jr.? Probably not too much. I honestly, off the top of my head, don't know how big of a drop it is from Ayton to Williams, if any. The backup center minutes are probably going to, like, whatever minutes Carter's on the floor against Jabari Walker, Chris Murray, Duop Reith, whatever the hell that is probably going to be nice. Ultimately, like, I don't think it would change. There's nothing that's going to change his projection that much, if at all. He does play some minutes against the second unit, so maybe we'll see him out there against somebody really bad. But yeah, ultimately, I think that it's not going to change too much. I didn't mention him. What's his price, actually? I mean, he's 6,300. He's getting 4% ownership. The problem is, like, you have Franz back now. Yeah, I mean, I think he's still just ultimately going to be a secondary play, where if you get to some Franz Wagner, that's fine. But I don't think he's going to stand out at 6,300, but certainly somebody you can play in tournaments. Upside is still there with no Goga. Sacramento taking on Denver. This game is interesting because Denver has not played a competitive game in a while. Sacramento, though, not a lot that's going to stand out. Malik Monk is getting 20% ownership. I'm at 15%. He's just 7K. Starting, playing big minutes in competitive games. Sacramento is one of the teams that does lean on their starters a bit heavier than others when games are competitive. You saw 37 and a half minutes yesterday. Obviously it being a back-to-back, there is a chance that Sacramento does run a little bit deeper rotation, does flatten things out a little bit. Maybe you get a little bit more Keon Ellis, Trey Lyles, Devin Carter, whatever. But with Monk projected for 34 minutes, I'm still getting about 15%. Fields getting to 12%, De'Aaron Fox at 8,400. I only got 4, but again, I do think he's fine. One other thing that is nice about De'Aaron Fox, it also applies to DeMar DeRozan. Those are the guys that are generally playing second unit minutes for Sacramento. So those are the minutes that are historically really, really good against Denver. Now, it is a little bit different now because Denver has Aaron Gordon back and he's been playing with that second unit. So that's one reason you're seeing Denver actually win these huge blowouts lately. Is normally what happens is Denver's starters destroy the first unit of whoever they're playing, and then their second unit is so bad that the other team gets back in it. And Denver ends up having to play their starters in the fourth quarter because the second unit gave up so many points that they can't comfortably rest their guys. Now you have Aaron Gordon playing with the second unit. That's not happening, and they're blowing teams out. So it's not the same bump necessarily that you have gotten in the past, but you do still have Fox and DeRozan most likely getting those minutes against Denver's second unit. But I'm not getting much of anything here outside of Monk. Again, I think any of these starters are fine. They should play big minutes, assuming the game's competitive. None of them are at price tags that really stand out as super favorable. Monk is, I think, pretty clearly the most underpriced of the group. On the Denver side, getting to a lot of Denver, so is the field. So from like a macro standpoint, I don't know who the final closer is for Denver. I'm not sure Michael Malone knows. But it does create a situation where, unfortunately, the field is there too. But Russell Westbrook is really interesting to me because he's only $6,200. He is getting 19% ownership. I'm at 29%. I projected him for 29 minutes. And basically the way that I view this is if this game ends up being competitive, Jamal Murray is closing, Nikola Jokic is closing, Michael Porter Jr. is closing. Probably Aaron Gordon, I would think, is closing. And then one of Westbrook or Brown is closing. Maybe both Brown and Westbrook are closing, but I assume Aaron Gordon finds his way in there. But basically, if you just look at game logs for Denver, you get the idea that Russell Westbrook is now limited to like 26 minutes with Aaron Gordon back. And I don't think that's necessarily the case. He hasn't stepped on the floor in the fourth quarter in any of their last like 5 games, but neither has Nikola Jokic. If you go back to January 12th, I believe it was the last game that Denver actually had to play fourth quarter minutes with all of their guys in. The closing lineup was Murray, Westbrook, Porter, Watson, and Jokic. Again, I assume now Aaron Gordon is Watson in that scenario, but I think you probably get at least one of Westbrook or Brown in the closing lineup. So I projected them both for 29. What really probably happens here is if the game's not competitive, they're playing like 26, or if they're the one that doesn't close, they're playing like 26. But if they're the one that does close, they're playing like 32, 33 still. Probably. So I do think that there is some upside here for somebody like Westbrook, who his salary is just kind of slowly dropping to 6,200. He's producing at a really high rate when he's on the floor. He's fitting really, really well in this lineup with Nikola Jokic. It's just a matter of, does he get to play fourth quarter minutes or not? Is the game competitive? You can make that same case for $4,300 Christian Brown as well. I'm not getting quite as much as the field, but I do think he's a reasonable value at that price. The salary just keeps falling. Then you get to, the more obvious guys. Jamal Murray, 7,200, playing big minutes. Also relatively blowout proof or at least more so than Jokic, for the same reasons that I was saying about J-Dub on OKC compared to SGA. Jokic basically plays the SGA rotation. Jamal Murray plays the J-Dub rotation, where Murray is out there to start the start the second and fourth quarters, means that he's a little bit more blowout proof than Jokic. You saw it in a game the other day where Murray, the gap started to close, and it actually looked like Jokic was going to have to play in the fourth, but Murray was already out there. Murray just shot the lights out for a minute, and Jokic never had to come back. So Murray is getting ownership. I do like him at 7,200. Obviously, I like Jokic at 12 too, if you can find the salary. Center only, very, very expensive. All that stuff does make it relatively difficult, but we are getting some value opening up. I wouldn't be surprised if I have more Jokic now, because I can play $3,200 Robert Williams at power forward, for example. Julian Strawther, 3,500. He's firmly in the rotation. I would say with Strawther to keep in mind that he has been playing through garbage time lately. So like on average, he's probably playing 21, 22 minutes. But he does have the potential to play 25 because Denver blows out whoever they're playing. In this case, Sacramento. So there is some volatility there for Strawther. Aaron Gordon, kind of the same thing, where he probably picks up an extra couple minutes if this game is competitive, since I think he closes. But at 4,200, still assuming he's limited around 22 minutes or so, I'm not that interested. The Bucks game's delayed to 8:30. Yeah, Einsteinium. The Bucks had travel issues. They pushed the game back an hour. Moving on to Chicago and Golden State. This game has, or this team rather, well, this game and this team both have Q tags that matter a lot. Chicago has Kobe White listed as questionable and Ayo Dosunmu listed as questionable. It was reported yesterday that Kobe White was most likely not going to play, but they keep listing him as questionable. I projected him out. I don't know. I'm just taking that report for what it's worth. I'm assuming he doesn't play. I have the Sunmu projected in. I don't know what to do with him. I think he went from probable to questionable yesterday too, so there is some chance he doesn't play. But that's how I broke it up for right now, and that made it so Chicago has a bunch of guys that are playable, but nobody that is a clear priority. Vooch is showing up the most for me, 8,200, 10% of my lineups. Giddey would get a playing time bump if Kobe White is out, so I'm a little bit over the field on him, getting to like 9%. Lonzo's minutes look more secure if Kobe White is out at 4,400. I'm a little below the field, but I think he looks like a good value. And then if Kobe White is out, like $3,500 Horton Tucker might not step on the floor, or he might play 20 minutes. Who knows? We do know from a just coaching tendency standpoint that Billy Donovan does prioritize having ball handlers out there. So the way I projected it, if the Sumnu is in and if White is out, I actually took minutes away from Julian Phillips and gave them to Horton Tucker. So basically, Phillips was like a semi DNP. Like I think I gave him 5 or 6 minutes. And then I gave around 13 minutes each to Terry, Horton Tucker, and Buzelis. May or may not actually go that way. If White and Dosunmu are out, I would be pretty confident that Horton Tucker's in the rotation at 3,500. And then it just becomes, if he plays well, he gets more minutes. If he doesn't play well, he doesn't. Dosunmu, 5,900. I projected him for 32 minutes. I assume he starts if he is playing, and White's not. But that still didn't really get him into many lineups. Jalen Smith is what he normally is. Backup center, plays basically every minute that Vooch doesn't play. But on this slate, it's just tough to get there. He's really similar to like Kelly Olynyk, I think, as far as what you're getting. Zach LaVine, if he gets in the lineups, great. If the Dosunmu is also out, you probably add a minute or so to LaVine's projection. But at 8,200, I think upside is certainly there. There's just a lot of guys that look like him. Patrick Williams, if the Dosunmu's out, playing time becomes a little bit more secure as well. Lonzo Ball, though, I think is probably the guy that gets the biggest bump. Him and Josh Giddey, I would say, probably get the biggest bumps relatively if the Dosunmu and White end up being out. Lonzo started in place of the Dosunmu or White, whoever. With both of them out last game, Lonzo started. Played mid-20s. We've seen, that his playing time has really ramped up lately. So he has the potential to look like to go from a good value at 4,400 to a very good value. Josh Giddey also at 7,100. Probably going to play huge minutes if both the Dosunmu and Kobe White end up being out. On the Golden State side, this is one of the teams that I am just using baseline projections for at the moment. I will update them after the show, obviously. But so kind of take everything over here with a grain of salt. But Steph Curry is questionable. Trace Jackson Davis is questionable. Kyle Anderson is out. Brandon Podziemski is back. Moses Moody is probable. Gary Payton is probable. Lindy Waters is questionable. Jonathan Kuminga and Draymond Green are still out also. So first of all, no idea who's playing for Golden State. Second of all, no idea who's starting for Golden State. Yesterday, we had Kevon Looney start in place of Trace Jackson Davis and then leave the game with an illness, and Trace Jackson Davis started the second half. I think Looney starts today. He's not on the injury report. When I do go in and update my stuff, I'm going to project Looney as the starter. At 4,100, I kind of doubt I get much of him still, especially with Robert Williams starting. That's just going to still project as the better value, lower opportunity cost, all of that. You have a bunch of good centers on the slate. But my guess is that Looney starts. If Jackson Davis 1 plays and 2 starts, then I do have some tournament interest in him just because the salary is down to 5,500. And if he is starting, I would still be expecting 25 minutes or so. So there would be some tournament upside there, but we'll have to see. Buddy Hield started in place of Schroeder yesterday. 4,500 shooting guard, small forward eligible. Makes him look like a decent value. Generally plays pretty good minutes when he starts. He only played 25 yesterday. I would probably project like 26 or so if he's starting. Podziemski being back obviously throws a wrench in things too. It does give you another, ball handler, guard type guy. So overall, if the questionable guys are in, Golden State's not super appealing, other than like Steph looks pretty good and Wiggins looks pretty good. But Steph's ownership would probably come up if he's in too. 8,800 is a pretty good price tag. The matchup against Chicago is really good. So obviously getting to Steph in tournaments is going to look good if he's in. Wiggins at 6,100 is going to look pretty good too. They are the two getting double-digit ownership right now. Boston taking on the Lakers with everybody in. No real ownership coming into Boston, which makes sense given that all of their guys are in. It does make them an interesting team to me, though, because you have a couple of guys at pretty cheap salaries. Drew Holiday, $4,700. Kristaps Porzingis, $6,900, and no ownership coming into these guys. Drew as a value play, I do think is pretty interesting. One thing that I find really interesting, and maybe it keeps up, maybe it doesn't, but in games this year where all of the main Boston pieces have been healthy or have been active, the starters plus Pritchard plus Horford, Drew Holiday is actually playing more minutes than Derek White on average. And I don't know that perception is like, I don't really know that that's known. Like, that's not really the perception when you think about Boston. I don't think, it's that Drew Holiday has been banged up at times and was kind of limited early in the year, but he's been playing, real minutes lately, averaging 30 minutes per game over the last 10. And in these games where everybody's been in, he's actually playing a little bit more than Derek White. He's only $4,700, so I do like getting to him a bit. Porzingis, we know, is a really high upside point per minute guy. Only 3% owned. There is opportunity cost of the position, but I think he's interesting in tournaments. Clearly, if you get to some Tatum or Brown, nothing wrong with that. But Drew and Porzingis are the guys actually showing up the most for me right now. On the Lakers side, probable tags on Davis and on LeBron. Nobody else questionable. Everybody else that's been in is in. No Hood Safino, no Vanderbilt, no Christian Wood. That's been the case every day. I am getting to nothing from the Lakers. The field is getting to nothing from the Lakers. You have Anthony Davis, center only, which is just going to be tough to get to here. LeBron, salary jump to $10,200. It's really, really tough to get to this team. I think if I outside of the obvious, LeBron, Anthony Davis, if they land in a lineup or whatever, it's fine. I think if I had to just grab one of the secondary pieces from the Lakers, it would probably be Finney Smith at 3,600, because I'm just waiting for the game where Dorian Finney-Smith goes out there and plays 26, 27 minutes. And this game is relatively likely to be competitive. There are a ton of wings on Boston, obviously, for Dorian Finney-Smith to guard. This could be the game where you just get 26, 27 minutes from Finney-Smith. He is 3,600. It's still just not something I'm very likely to be getting to today. And then wrapping things up with Washington and the Clippers. Really interesting note from Washington last game, which who knows if it applies today or not. They cut down to an 8-man rotation, and we had actually seen them do that a while ago. And then you had the stretch where Jared Butler was kind of forcing his way into a handful of minutes, and Champagnie played well in some starts, so he was forcing his way into 10 minutes a game. They went back to the 8-man rotation last game, which what that means is if the game is competitive, there is massive minute upside for these guys. Where you really saw it show up last game was in Keyshawn George and in Corey Kispert. Both of those guys played 31 minutes. George picked up a couple minutes of garbage time. Kispert didn't. It really impacts those guys. It also means that Carrington could, if he's playing well, play a little bit more. I didn't project straight 8-man rotation here. I gave a couple of minutes outside of garbage time to both of Butler and Champagnie, just to account for the fact that I don't think Washington's just, going to run 8-man rotations into the ground all season long, given that they are the worst team in the league. But it was an interesting note. It does just give some additional minutes upside, in addition to the other upside that you always get from Washington, which is this team is priced to get run out of the gym every single game. And normally that's what happens. And then you pair that here with the Clippers, who are involved in a blowout every single day. I assume this game ends up being a blowout, but there's just a lot of baked in upside for all of the relevant Washington pieces here. And I'm getting to them a lot right now, which generally doesn't go well, but it makes a lot of sense to me when you look at the pricing. You have a $4,100 Bub Carrington starting, probably playing around 30 minutes, but if he's playing well, he could play more. Sub 10% owned. Jordan Poole, 6,900. If Washington hangs in this game, good chance Jordan Poole is playing well and playing a lot. Keyshawn George, like I was just saying, 3,800, kind of has a path to minutes in a variety of ways. The team plays like shit, he can play garbage time minutes because he's a rookie and they want to get him minutes. He plays well, he can get more minutes. Just the rotation they played last game, he basically was the sixth and a half man, other than, along with Corey Kispert. Alex Sarr, 5,500 power forward eligible, playing 20 7 to 30 minutes in games that are relatively competitive. Kuzma only played like 28 minutes last game, but we have seen him eclipse 30 minutes recently as well. I have him in for 30. But if he's playing well and this game's competitive, he can play more. So there's just, I think, a lot of upside potential for these Washington guys. Kispert, Koulibaly, Joval, all playable too. I don't know if I end up with this much once the slate starts. I certainly wouldn't be upset if that got dialed back a little bit, but this team just isn't getting rostered, and like all of the risk is kind of baked into the salary to some extent. On the Clippers side, now I was hoping I would have more Clippers. Like if I'm playing a lot of Washington, I would like to have a lot of Clippers too, because like if Jordan Poole plays well and plays full minutes, it's likely that you're getting 35 minutes from Harden or something. But also Harden is up to 9,500, Powell's up to 7,400, so it's not like you have a lot of great spots to get to on the Clippers from a salary standpoint, with the exception of Zubats, who is back here. He missed the last couple of games, but not on the injury report today. 7,200. I have him as the best play type matchup on the slate, ahead of Trae Young by actually a pretty good margin. So it's obviously a good matchup in general against Washington, but also just for what Zubats does and what Washington gives up, it looks really good too. I like getting to him a lot. I would assume that in Zubats lineups, I have a good amount of these Washington guys. Yeah, like half of my Zubats lineups have Poole, 24% have Carrington, George, Kuzma, Koulibaly. Basically, like every Koulibaly lineup has Zubats. So I do like to see that they are paired like that. Zubats is my favorite guy to get to from the Clippers. I am over the field, 2x on Harden. I'm around the field on Powell. Field's not really getting to anybody else. $4,400 KPJ, probably in the rotation and possibly getting garbage time run also. I don't think he's like a priority or anything, but Chris Dunn is out, so I do assume he's in the rotation. And then one other thing I guess to touch on here, the way I projected this, there is some ambiguity about who will end up starting for the Clippers. My guess was Harden, Powell, Jones, Kawhi, and Zubats. So that's the assumption I was going with. If you get something like Terrence Mann at 3,700, obviously his projection would go up. If you were to get like KPJ somehow, he would obviously look better. But that was my assumption. So Zubats looks like the priority to me. Harden looks like a guy that maybe I'll be a little bit over the field on. I would assume that I'm pairing him with Washington guys a decent amount too. George, Poole, Carrington, Kuzma, all showing up at pretty high rates with Harden, which is what I would want to see. So that's all I have for you on this one. Thank you for checking out the show. Don't forget to sign up for my projections using one of the links in the description below, whether you just join Endgame or you just want the projections. Either one gets you access. So check those out. 3-day trial on the Dub Club link as well. DraftKings and FanDuel projections in there. Other than that, hit the thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel. Thank you for checking out the show, and I'll be back here at the same time tomorrow.